which we're talking about censorship, they won't publish some of Dr. Seuss's books now. Like, you legitimately cannot buy them. They pulled them out of the Seuss canon.
Take a little turn toward the literary section of Clay and Buck World for a moment here. You may have seen the headlines about Roald Dahl. I always try to make sure I pronounce his name properly.
I didn't know how to pronounce it. You've already taught me a lesson there.
I mean, is it just Roll and then Dahl, or is it Roald Dahl? It's not easy. Point being that Mr. Dahl, we could all agree on that one, is among the most beloved and famous children's book authors of all time. He has sold hundreds of millions of books, and this is now, it's been translated into almost 70 languages, I think, his different works. If you're wondering, what would be on the Roald Dahl list, all the parents, I'm sure, already know, but for folks who haven't bought any children's books in a while or don't remember, you had James and the Giant Peach, which I remember being read to me by teachers in what we called lower school of primary school, so second, third grade. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which the movie, wasn't Gene Wilder in that one?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Fantastic movie.
Great movie. I saw
then
that
one.
one.
Then they remade it with Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp, yeah.
Not anywhere near as good.
No. But Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Witches, which I actually always thought the movie was quite scary when I was a kid, of the Witches. But that's another very famous one. What am I leaving?
Matilda.
Matilda, thank you. There's a bunch of the biggest.
The BFG. A lot of these movies, a lot of these very, very fantastic. Mr. Fox, like
yes.
A lot of them very well known.
Incredibly well known author, incredibly successful. But the estate and the publisher, I believe, which is Puffin, that controls the continued publication of his works, is going back and changing the language in some of these, changing the language so that it is less offensive. Now, Dr. Seuss, who is, I think, in that same category of most famous children's authors of all time. I mean, I'm not sure, who. I wonder who has sold more books in total, Seuss or Dr. Seuss or Roald Dahl.
I would be stunned if it's not Seuss, just because he published over 100 books, I think. But they started to pull, to your point, which we're talking about censorship, they won't publish some of Dr. Seuss's books now. Like, you legitimately cannot buy them. They pulled them out of the Seuss canon.
Well, they've gotten rid of some of the Dr. Seuss stuff because they say it is there are depictions that are racially insensitive. That's what they got Seuss in trouble. But if you look at what's getting pulled now from Roald Dahl books, it's descriptions like fat, for example. It's a sensitivity about the witches in the book The Witches being bald under their wigs. It is these minor edits that are meant to describe characters in ways that are less offensive. And now I understand people might say, well, okay, if it's just kind of minor stuff. No. We all know how this goes. Once the machinery of retroactive censorship of great authors is in place, does anyone believe that the demands from the woke will stop at describing somebody as enormous instead of fat, which is one of the changes they're making to, like, the little German boy who wants the chocolate in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Remember? And the mother, she's like, oh, like, guten Tag, and she runs over, and he's drinking all that chocolate. Look, I'm kind of a chocolate-aholic, so I respect that the kid wanted to get in there. But he was a chubby little German boy, and he fell into the river of chocolate. Now he's described as enormous instead of fat. This, Clay, I just think this is the beginning, right? This is the thin end of the wedge. And it's not like this is the first time, but instead of just even saying, you can't say this because it's offensive, now we're seeing beloved, globally famous authors with their work getting just tweaked here and there, just changing it here and there to make it less offensive.
this ties into me with the craziness of Disney doing away with the wildly popular ride inside of Magic Kingdom, right? I mean, Splash Mountain. So many people out there listening to us right now have in the last 30 years gone on Splash Mountain, and they decide that Brer Rabbit is now too offensive to be featured as a part of the most popular ride in the Magic Kingdom, and so they're editing for wokeness an amusement park ride. And I look at this, and as an author, and look, my books are, a pinprick of any of this. I find it awful that after my death, somebody would come in and change the words that I had published in my writing, such that I would want as an author to almost have signed off on something that would prohibit this from ever having occurred. And this idea of going back and censoring what someone might have said or how they described someone in a book, it also makes it more difficult to see the evolution of language. And Buck, I think we should mention about Dahl. Did you know that he was a fighter pilot? In addition to being in World War II, in addition to being one of the most acclaimed children's authors of all time, he was a squadron commander and a fighter pilot in World War II, by the way, on the right side of history there. So I just find this incredibly troubling. And as an author, whether it's J.K. Rowling, who's under attack right now, another popular children's author, because she has the audacity to say men are men and women are women. And I look and see the way that this is all being treated, and I think you're right. The problem with everybody out there who acquiesces on this, people say, well, it's just changing fat to enormous. Why do you care? Because what the woke have shown us, and this is the answer for everybody out there, because you're constantly said, why do you care? Well, first of all, I care because you're changing something. So you cared and made the alteration. But the real issue is it doesn't ever end. The woke universe demands constant new sacrifices. It doesn't, we've said this before on the show, Buck. If you told me, hey, Clay, I bet you and I would actually be good representatives for the sane anti-woke community. If we sat across the negotiating table from the woke community and we could give them the Washington Redskins and we could give them this word that we'll take out of the vocabulary and we just said, okay, this ends it. We no longer negotiate anymore. Everybody leaves and everybody's happy now. They have to find things to be offended by. And this is not the end. This is the, hey, we've proven that we can do this. Once we prove we're going to do it, we're going to continue to pick and prod on these works.
And again, there's the censorship that comes from removing from the text entirely. And then there's also the censorship that comes from just changing it, from editing it from what it was to suit the sensibilities of the woke. So there are different ways that they come at this, and I think this is, I can't think of a time when they've done this before, when they've just gone back with such a famous author and just started to alter words, right? With the Dr. Seuss stuff, they just stopped publishing certain books, or they took
which is
things
even
out.
worse, I think, than this. But this is scarier because it alters the way you experience it.
This, over the long term, could be used to try to shape perceptions, and also have all authors. I mean, if you can do this with Roald Dahl, why can't you do it with Shakespeare? Why can't you do it with Edmund Burke? Why can't you do it? I mean, name somebody, right? I mean, you go through history, Socrates, all of a sudden Plato isn't saying what he said about men and women and slaves.
Or
and all
Huckleberry Finn. You decide, I mean, the way that Jim and Huckleberry Finn, for those of you who studied that book, I mean, there's raw language that would have been common in the 1880s in that book. Well, if you take that out, you strip away the historical context in which that relationship occurred, and you demean the overall understanding of the work as a whole. And it's so important. I think this is a huge story. And I want to hit this because some critics will say, well, you guys aren't standing up for, they're trying to take this book out of schools. And this is important. And I think Republicans do a really poor job talking about this. There is a difference between discussing when it is age appropriate for kids to be reading books and what books should be available to them in a kindergarten, first, and second grade library, and saying the book shouldn't be available at all. And in the context of movies, Buck, parents do this all the time, right? You know, when we were growing up, I bet your parents were a lot like mine. There were a lot of shoot-'em-up movies, right? Action-adventure movies. They might have been rated R. Were you allowed to go see that movie? You weren't saying, oh, we're censoring this movie from kids when it's rated R. You're saying, no, we're letting parents know there's an age-appropriate context under which PG-13, maybe a 9-year-old doesn't need to see that movie. There's a big difference between this, which is direct censorship, and debating and discussing the age-appropriate nature of books for kids. Widely different, and I think Republicans do an awful job of discussing that difference.
Yeah, they need to hit back every time they say, and they're going after Ron DeSantis on this a lot lately because of the curriculum change in Florida, and they're lying, but we need to say they're lying. There's a very clear difference between this book is banned and we're not going to assign or teach this book to a 6-year-old. Okay?
Massively different, yes.
Yeah, everyone can understand this. And I will say DeSantis won this argument when it came to the bill about what could be taught in schools. Remember? Because Democrats tried this lie of, oh, you're never allowed to say that you're gay. That was the big story they were trying to push. And then Ron DeSantis was like, why do you have to talk about transgender ideology to people? It said in the bill, before the 3rd grade. I mean, second graders...
If anything, I think that was too kind, right? Why do 4th and 5th graders need to be dealing with sexuality-related issues?
But because it had that clear language, that clear designation, it was possible to win the argument, not only with Republicans, very important, Democrats in the state of Florida, by solid majority, agreed with Ron DeSantis on this. So that was one of those cases when they say, because you hear this talk put all the time, who's the enormous, because we can't say fat, governor of Illinois, Pritzker. Thank you. He does this.
He is super fat, by the way. I'll go ahead and say it. Super
enormous
fat
is
Pritzker.
what you're supposed to say now, according to the Roald Dahl censors.
Yes.
But yes, he's a large fellow. He talked about banning books, how they're banning books in these states. They're just lying. This is a lie. There's no book being banned. In fact, if anyone is banning books, as we know, it is the left. The left are the ones that decide that something should be no longer in print, no longer published, no longer sold. We just don't want them teaching pansexuality to second graders. That seems reasonable to me.
I can't impress upon everybody out there listening enough, because Eric Adams said, we don't ban books here in New York. Nothing's being banned. If people want to go buy these books and have them inside of their household, that's fine. Age-appropriate natures at which kids should be reading is the foundation of parenting. And if you just put it in the context of movies, nobody ever says, oh, they rated that movie PG-13. They're trying to ban kids from seeing it. No, you're just letting people know what you think a roughly age-approximate viewing experience should be. It's not crazy. It's common sense. I was already a Dahl fan, obviously. He's written a lot of incredible books. But, Buck, I've been reading about his service during World War II, and we've got a great call I'm going to get to in a sec. But in 1940, in Africa, he crashed his airplane, couldn't find the airstrip, was in no man's land, forced to attempt a landing in the desert. I'm reading from Wikipedia, so FYI, but it's all cited. Under courage, hit a boulder, aircraft crashed, his skull was fractured, his nose was smashed, he was temporarily blinded. He managed to drag himself away from the blazing wreckage, lost consciousness, was then rescued, went back and ended up fighting all over Europe as a fighter pilot, and then becomes one of the most renowned children's authors of all time.